So please give a warm welcome to Reverend Scott Olson.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? So, I was thinking back at the first service, and it still holds true that I feel like I've come home in some odd way. This has never been my spiritual home here, but I know Reverend Michael and Nicole so well, and I know a number of people that are here through, traveling around doing things in ministerial school. And I was also thinking that the very first time I showed up here was about 15 years ago when Reverend Sonny Cantrell did the Enlightenment here. And so I've had a bit of a history with Seal Beach, and it's really good to come and be home. Isn't it nice to be home wherever you are? Yeah. So today's talk title is Shoot for the Moon. And how I got the talk title was I was listening to a video, and it had a quote in it by Norman Vincent Peale that says, "Shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars." All right? And I grabbed onto that quote, and I really liked it, and I put it into a list of things that I use. I keep a long list of potential talk titles and things that I want to say in those talks. And so I've been bumping up against this quote for quite a while, for a couple of years now. And every time I come to it, it seems to have a little bit different message to me. And so sometimes when I think about it, it reminds me of the 30 years I spent in the space industry. I worked in TRW, it's now Northrop Grumman, Space Park in Redondo Beach, made satellites, all of that stuff. And so I know a little bit about the space business. And one of the things that I noticed about it is that even though it has very specific requirements, when you're making things for space, somehow some of that stuff leaks out into the real world, right? Into you and I's world. And it's kind of like this synergy of events, because you're doing one thing and you get this other thing as a bonus, right? So sometimes when you shoot for the moon, you get that kind of a bonus. I was thinking about the original moon race, and that was back in the 60s. And at that time, they decided in 1962 that they were going to build this command module, and they were going to send people to the moon and back. And they said they needed a computer for the command module. Well, the command module, if you've ever seen it, fits in this corner over here. In 1962, a computer would have fit into this room, right? And so they needed to shrink that computer down, and they did, and that's what allowed us to have personal computers at home, right? And our PCs and our laptops. And then I also thought back to July 20th, 1969, and I was a little kid, and I was sitting there on the floor next to the television, just as close as I could get there without my mom reaching and snatching me back. And I was there because I was watching Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. And what I know is that event and all the events that led up to it, all the work that led up to it, it inspired generations of young people to go into math and into science and into engineering. I know because I'm one of them, right? And so we get a lot of benefits when we shoot for the moon. We might be looking for this one material object, and we'll find all these other things come into our life. And that's a great thing. But there's another way of looking at it, which is Norman Vincent Peale was born in 1898. 1898, a long time ago. And then there are other people who have that same shoot for the moon quote. They add something else on the end of it. It goes all the way back to the Civil War. And in fact, Emerson has a shoot for the moon type of quote. And so what I know is for those people like Emerson, they never expected to actually get to the moon. There was no way if they shot for the moon that they were ever going to get there. But what I know and what I've seen in my own life is when I choose to shoot for the moon, when I choose to stretch myself out to do something that seems so wildly impossible to me, that I expand, right? Shoot for the moon, you land among the stars. That's what Norman Vincent Peale said. And if you land among the stars, you're landing among the celestial being, the body of all that there is. And you are expanded. I am expanded. So shoot for the moon means that you can either get material good in your life or you can be expanded. Now, today I want to talk a little bit more about that. How do we live in a more expanded life through that shoot for the moon attitude? But I also want to talk about hope. Because to me, shoot for the moon is absolutely this desire to be more. And it brings with me, to me, a lot of hope. And I also want to talk about what it is and how it is that we can bring hope more into our lives and what that means and what it looks like. So I want to talk for a few minutes about somebody that I know you'll know. In fact, I heard after the first service that Reverend Juanita read this entire poem from Maya Angelou last week. And so, Maya Angelou, I love her poetry. And the first time I was introduced to Maya Angelou was in 1993, watching television. I saw her on TV at Bill Clinton's inaugural address, his ceremony. And he had asked her to write a poem specifically for that and to read it there on the stage. And she did. She wrote a poem called On the Pulse of the Morning. And when I watched her, I really don't remember much about that poem, but the thing that I got out of listening to her speak, listening to her read that poem, was that there are layers upon layers upon layers of meaning in poetry. And it inspired me to go back and read more of her poems. And some of her poems are my favorite poems now. But it wasn't her poetry that drew me to include her in this talk today. What drew me to include her in the talk was that I was looking for a story about hope. Because shoot for the moon, remember I said it reminded me of hope. So I was looking for hope, and I was looking through my bookshelves, looking for something that I could put in about hope. And I didn't find anything on the bookshelves, so I went to my Kindle, and I'm looking through the books in the Kindle, and one of the titles just popped out at me. It was, I Know Why a Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. Now, I had never read that. Never read the book before. I had bought it about a year before and had intended to read it, but I hadn't read it yet. But what I know is that I was being pulled from here, from my heart. It was saying, there's something about hope here in this book. Something that I need to include in this talk. So I read it. I always listen to those things, those messages of intuition. And I read it, and I started reading the first few pages, and what I found is that Maya Angelou was born in April of 1928. So she'd be 90 years old if she was alive today. And that just gives you an idea. This book is an autobiography of her, so it gives you an idea of the time frame. She's talking mostly about the 1930s in the book. And in this book, it talks about her living in a place called Stamps, Arkansas. Now, if you're familiar with the South in the 1930s, for a little black girl to to be living in the South, she would have been living in poverty, discrimination, racism, segregation, abuse. And that's actually the story that's in that book. Now, I was looking for hope. I'm scratching my head a little bit. All right. Then I realized that I had a history with Arkansas. I have quite a history with Arkansas, actually, because when I was 6 years old, I moved to Arkansas. I moved to a little town, Willisville, Arkansas, a tiny little dot of a town on the map. And it had a general store and a gas station. That was about it. And we had a ranch. And the most memorable thing out of that ranch was that we had pigs, and there was this one hog named Charlie that was more interested in eating my brother and I than he was in eating the pig slop. Yeah, he'd chase us around like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, so I recognized that I had a little bit of history there, but I had something else. I adopted 3 children altogether. The first 2 boys out of foster care had been born in Hot Springs, Arkansas. They were biological brothers, and when I adopted them, I found that they had grandparents in Hot Springs. They had 3 half-brothers in Hot Springs, and so we decided that each year we would go to Hot Springs, Arkansas on Thanksgiving. 2 days there, 5 days, 2 days driving there, 5 days there, 2 days driving back. And we did that for years. And so I have a bit of history with Arkansas, as I said. And so the thing I recognize is that I understood Maya Angelou's story then. Because when I lived in Arkansas, it was still segregated. I looked up the town of Stamps, Arkansas, and I was really surprised to find that Stamps, Arkansas was less than 15 miles away from Willisville, Arkansas. And so I really felt akin to her. And I know that when I was in Arkansas in 1967, even though the Civil Rights Act had been passed in 1964, even though Brown versus the Board of Education was decided in 1956, Willisville, Arkansas was still segregated. The school, there were no black children in my school. They had another school, right? And so I actually identify, and the book helps a lot because the book is so good. It's like poetry in motion. It's so good at leading you in and letting you know exactly what the people were thinking at that moment. So I got to the end of the book, and I recognized that I personally did not find any hope in that book. And I was really flummoxed because I had been guided by my intuition to read this book to find hope. And so I sat with that for more than a day, and then all of a sudden I got the aha. And the aha was, what the hope wasn't in the book. The hope is in her poetry. And in her poetry, there is so much hope. I want to read you just the first snippet of the poem that Reverend Juanita read you last week. It's Still I Rise. It says, "You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise." And what I recognized from that poem is there's a lot of hope in that poem. And what I recognized is that it took someone like Maya Angelou with her history to have written that poem. Now, I want to be really clear on this. Maya Angelou did not create with her mind segregation and racism and poverty, but she lived through it. She lived through it because there were millions of people in America at that time that believed in that. But what she did, the part that she played in this, was that she had a choice. And she expressed those choices. And as we know, God always supports us in our choices. She had a choice to get a good education. It's amazing, the education that she gave herself in Stamps, Arkansas. She's one of the most best read as far as a child, of what I can tell from the book. I thought I read a lot of books. She read even more. And so she chose that. And then when she grew up past the book itself, right? The book was just her childhood. This book, there's more books I'm going to have to read. But she chose to be a poet. She could have chosen something else. She chose to be a poet. And on top of that, when she chose to write her poetry, she chose to write poetry that lifted people up, that gave people hope, that gave people life. And you know, the way things work is God wastes nothing. God wasted none of her childhood, none of her experiences, and it is the divine that's writing that poem, I am sure. It's the life that God is, touching us at our very heart. So, I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about my own life, and where is it that in my life there are places where I don't think there's any hope, and yet there is. Things from the past, way back past, or things from yesterday. There's things that I don't always seem to think and see the hope in that moment, but there is hope. There's always, always, always hope. And I'm sure that's true for you too. So I want to talk for a moment about a story that I heard on NPR the other day. It's a local news story, and so you might have heard about it too. It happened last week. It's a story of Jesse Hernandez, who was a 13-year-old boy playing with some friends in Griffith Park, and he was walking across a piece of wood, and it broke underneath him, and he plunged 25 feet down into the sewers. And I heard about this on NPR, and I heard it from the tale was being told by Captain Eric Scott of the LA Fire Department. And the reason it stuck with me was because he told this story. It was obvious that he had so much hope the entire time that he was doing the rescue, the search and rescue. He was leading that effort up. He had hope going the entire time. And so as he explains, when Jesse fell down, he fell 25 feet to begin with, and then he landed in this maze of sewer pipes that are 4 feet wide, waist deep in water. The water's running 15 miles an hour, and he could be anywhere, and there's noxious gas down there. And so they knew they had to go find him quickly, and they scurried. They got people from the fire department, they got specialists from the city who had maps of the sewer system, they got people that had cameras that they could put down into the sewer lines. They did this all quickly. And then it was the wee hours of the morning, and they didn't go home. They didn't say, I'm tired. They didn't say, I haven't had anything to eat. They didn't say, it's cold out here. Because they had hope. They had the hope of finding this boy alive and well, pushing them forward. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, they found handprints on the pipes with the cameras. And so they were able to narrow things down, and then they opened a trap door, and there looking up at them was Jesse Hernandez, alive and well. So the point of the story is that there's always hope. There's always hope, and when we have hope, and when we bring hope to every situation, in every moment of our day, in every aspect of our life, not just when we are reaching for the moon, shooting for the moon, but when we're doing the small, mundane things of our life, when we're dealing with our family, there is hope. And so I want to leave you with one last quote from Ernest Holmes, our founder. He says, "Yesterday is not, tomorrow is not, but today, bright with hope and filled with promise, is mine. Today I live." And so what I want to do is I want to encourage you today to go out from here and to think about, where is it that you could shoot for the moon? And you should have gotten one of these Star Cruisers when you walked in today. You know, it's just a reminder for you. And where is it that you can shoot for the moon, and by that, find a purpose, find hope in every situation, and know that you are the life that God is, that it is moving through you and as you. And if that is true, then you live a God-filled life that is bright with hope and filled with promise. Thank you, and namaste.